Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Down the Tee Tennis Podcast. And we're coming at you with a bit of a new format. We're moving away a bit from the previous format of preview and predictions coming into tournaments. We're still going to do that, but specials for kind of big tournaments, you know, the slams and maybe a few others. And we're moving more into maybe a news and discussion podcast as a monthly. So looking at these gaps in the calendars as we've got now after this week's action, and just summing up the action that's been happening for the last month or so. So, you know, starting with that on the ATP side, a lot of tournaments to run through, and I'll just quickly run you through the winners. The first week after the Open, we had 3 250s, Alexander Bublik, João Sousa, remember that name? And, you know, a bit of a blast from the past to me, João Sousa, but he's come back and he's won a title. And Ramos Vinolas as well, winning that week. We went into Rotterdam 500, where Felix AugerAliassime gets his, you know, long-awaited first title. There was also wins in 250s for Casper Ruud and Riley Opelka that week. Following that week, we went into another 500 in Rio. Carlos Alcaraz becoming the first 18-year-old to win a 500 since Rafael Nadal. That week, we also had Rublev, Norian, Roberto Batista Agut all taking 250 titles. And finally, we moved on to this week's 2 500s, Acapulco and Dubai, where Rafa Nadal continued his excellent start to the year, taking the title against Cam Norrie, and Andrey Rublev taking another title, 2 titles in a row for him, consecutive weeks. So a lot to unpick there, but we're going to have to start with someone who hasn't played that much in this last month, and it's Daniil Medvedev, new world number 1, a deserving world number 1, Ewan.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a deserving world number 1 in the sense that I definitely feel it was a matter of time that he was going to get there. It was just a question of when. I thought he definitely had a good chance of doing it this year at some point, but it's probably come a bit earlier than you'd have expected. You know, predicting it at the start of the year, given obviously Djokovic not playing in Australia, he did lose a lot of points there. I mean, there's no getting away from it. I guess those 2,000 points he dropped from the title last year have played a big role in this, but look, Medvedev's a deserving world number 1 in the sense of what we've seen from him really since 2019, but particularly 2021 and even the start of this year, reaching the Australian Open final and a pretty good showing in Acapulco. He deserves it. I'm not going to come here and say he doesn't deserve it. It isn't his fault, and he has no control over what is going on with Djokovic. He's continued his own impressive results, and like I said, I do think he would have got there eventually. It probably would have taken a bit longer, but a fantastic achievement for him to join, you know, that exclusive list of players who've been world number 1, and to be the first of his generation to do it is definitely a significant thing out of the younger guys. So massive congratulations to Medvedev.
Yeah, I think I remember a situation towards the end of last season where if he'd have kept winning, then he was likely going to be year-end number 1. If he'd have defended all his points from the finals and won a couple of, I think, Paris and stuff in the weeks previous, then he may have taken the number 1 off Djokovic, and a lot of people were kind of gearing up for it to happen then. It does feel a little bit sad that he hasn't had that moment almost on court of maybe, you know, maybe even in an ideal world against Djokovic in a final, taking him down, getting those points, taking those points off Djokovic and getting the chance to like put himself on world number 1. It's kind of, in a way, being gifted to him, you know, Djokovic not playing in Australia, then, you know, taking an uncharacteristic defeat to a qualifier here in Vesely, who's a good player, by the way. He's been quite high in the rankings before, but he's had a shocking last 2 years, I think, really. So it was a massively surprising result, and yeah, it's gifted Daniil Medvedev the world number 1. But, you know, we've got to look at his results and his performances. He is, for me, he probably is the best player in the world right now. He was not dethroned, but taken down by Nadal in 5 sets at the Australian Open, where he was definitely the favourite for that final. He's actually taken another defeat to Nadal in a hard court final as well. Coming into this year, I wouldn't have expected to see Nadal take down Medvedev in 2 hard court finals, but here we are. Djokovic is, you know, running Dubai to the quarterfinals. He had a couple of good results early on. Like, he looked top notch in a game. I think it was against Kieran in that match. He looked, you know, you're like, oh yeah, class. Djokovic is just going to come back and win it all now. The tournament is allowed to enter anyway. But Do you think that defeat to Vesely may be influenced by the fact he hasn't been able to play much tennis recently?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a factor. I mean, obviously having not played since the Davis Cup finals in December, it's not a lengthy break, but it is a fairly significant one. With this being his first tournament of the year, obviously you would usually by this stage have played in at least the Australian Open, probably the ATP Cup. So I think it definitely did make a difference. But like you said, I thought he was impressive in his previous two matches. I mean, I watched a majority of all three of his matches in Dubai, and I thought his level was really good, as you mentioned, particularly against Khachanov. I was impressed by him, and even against Vesely, I don't think he played a poor match. I mean, obviously he wasn't at his best, but I thought his level was pretty good. I really thought Yuri Vesely played an unbelievable match there and really had an unbelievable tournament, as you mentioned. You went on to reach the final. I think it's probably as well as Vesely's played, and like you said, coming really out of the blue after a really difficult couple of years from where he dropped well below his kind of his career best ranking and to outside the top 100 where he was going in this week, but then to qualify to beat Cilic and Bautista Agut pretty convincingly in straight sets, and then to beat Djokovic. I thought Vesely really played some fantastic tennis, so I don't think it's too alarming a defeat for Djokovic, just given the lack of tennis, given Vesely's level. And then we saw him going back up against Shapovalov in the semi-finals, which was another great match, 7-6 in the third set. So yeah, really impressed by Vesely. I think we've seen him do well at Wimbledon before, and he enjoys fast courts and I think lower bouncing courts, which Dubai is definitely something that fits that profile in terms of the hard court events. So yeah, from Djokovic's point of view, it's just going to need to play more matches, but that looks unlikely given the situation which we might come on to.
Yeah, and also I just want to move on briefly to, we've finally got a next gen. I think feel we have to do that with Medvedev because he's a bit older than the rest of the next gen. World #1, and the next gen may be arriving. Felix AugerAliassime, he's been highly rated for a long time. I remember when he was breaking through, especially in 2019. I remember commentators waxing lyrical about him at Queen's, saying that he is the real deal. But it's taken until his ninth final to finally get his hands on an ATP career title. Rotterdam 500, it is a good title, though. He did follow it up by another final defeat the following week to Andrey Rublev. But yeah, Felix, do you feel like it was almost a mental hurdle for him finals, and now that he's got over that, he could really push on?
Yeah, definitely. I think it was. I'm pleased for him, really, that he was able to do it. I mean, after losing those 8 finals without winning a set, it was tough for him. And I mean, he did have some really tough opponents in those finals. There was some other circumstances there. It wasn't as if he just played awfully in all of them, like the record maybe suggests. But yeah, there definitely was a bit of a mental thing, I think, with maybe the previous few. I mean, he really wanted to get over the line as soon as possible. And I mean, to do it in a 500 event, a pretty big tournament like Rotterdam, and going through some really quality opponents like he did, especially against Rublev in the semi-finals from a set down, and then Tsitsipas beating him convincingly in the final. I mean, 2 fantastic wins against fellow top 10 players and players of a similar generation to him, who are going to be his rivals, for the rest of his career. Really a fantastic result for him to get that first title on the board, and he just played a fantastic level of tennis. But I think we did see it coming in terms of the level I think he started this year with in Australia, obviously helping Canada to win the ATP Cup, and then his great run at the Australian Open to the quarterfinals where he pushed Medvedev in an epic match. But even from kind of the middle of last year, I've been really impressed by his level pretty much from the grass court season onwards. So, I mean, we saw it at the last 3 Grand Slams, quarterfinals at Wimbledon, semis at the US Open, then the quarters in Australia, as we mentioned. So fantastic result for Felix, and I think it's going to be onwards and upwards, really.
So in your opinion, what do you think Felix's ceiling is? Is it world #1? Is it Grand Slam titles? Or do you see more of maybe like your Thomas Berdych, pushing always up there, but not quite ever being the best?
For me, I think he's got the potential to be a world #1 and a Grand Slam winner. Just looking at his game, and I think the level, and we've seen from the improvements he's made, as we mentioned, I don't think he's really missing much. It was just the question of that mental side, whether he was going to get over that hurdle. He's maybe at times the nerves have got to him. Not that that's been a big criticism. He is still a very young player, but I think already the level we're seeing from him now, and I mean, as I mentioned, just has a fantastic serve, huge forehand, backhand's improved, which maybe was a slight, not weakness, but it's become more of a weapon, more solid. I mean, he's a great athlete as well, unbelievable movement, returns well. So I don't think there's really any holes in his game. I think he could be one of the elite players really of this younger generation.
Yeah, and we'll get on now to a man that he's likely to be competing with as one of those elite players of this generation. I mean, out of the players that are still teenagers, you know, your Musettis, Yannick Sinner as well. I think Carlos Alcaraz, out of maybe the next gen, we'll say, is really emerged as the top talent, hasn't he? And winning a 500 in Rio at 18 years old, just how impressive is Carlos's game?
Oh, incredibly impressive. I mean, as I mentioned, in AugerAliassime, a player with virtually no weaknesses. I mean, Alcaraz has already shown signs of being someone who could do that. I mean, he's got areas he can improve a lot. But I mean, at 18 years old, as you mentioned, the youngest ATP 500 winner since Nadal. I mean, just already a fantastic indicator of the progress he's made. But I mean, looking at his game, obviously his 2 titles so far have come on clay courts. So that seems to be his best service. But we've seen fantastic things from him on hard courts as well. And I mean, just he has an unbelievable forehand. His backhand is also a fantastic shot, extremely solid, but also a weapon. And he has that athleticism, the movement. He has an unbelievable drop shot as well, particularly on the forehand side, which is also makes his forehand even more dangerous because players are sometimes on the back foot expecting the big forehand, and he can play that fantastic drop shot. So it really does put players off balance. Like I think we saw a bit in that final against Schwartzman in Rio. And yeah, and obviously the mental side, he already seems to have mental toughness, a great attitude, obviously, which is just key. So just already so impressed by Alcaraz, and I think possibly, well, as you mentioned, the most impressive player of the next generation, and possibly the most impressive player, you could argue, in terms of potential, 25 or under, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, we've always got to be a bit careful with the next gen. You know, you look at some players that have been highly rated when they've broken through and not really kicked on and not backed it up. And then you start to wonder, is it really fair to talk about players of that age in the way that we do sometimes, putting the pressure on, making them the next big thing, and then, you know, building them up to bring them down almost. Carlos obviously being Spanish and his career almost mirroring Rafa Nadal's in some cases. A lot of people say the next Rafa. I don't want to say that because I think he's got very different aspects to his game. But do you feel more than anyone on the tour, kind of around that age, he is the player that you can see reaching the heights of Federer, Nadal, Djokovic? I mean, it's hard to compare people to those three, isn't it? Because the way they've pushed on tennis is unbelievable. But, you know, does he have that potential?
Yeah, I think he does have that potential. And as you say, it is always difficult to predict, and we're not intending to kind of put pressure on him. But I do just think that's how good he's looked just from what we have seen from him so far, and the rapid rate at which he's developed. I mean, obviously he's already into the top 20 now. And I mean, you know, it's not out of the question seeing him in the top 10, maybe even the top 8 at the ATP finals by the end of the year, just from what we've seen from him already. But I mean, I'm also impressed by how him and his team manage his schedule, and he already kind of schedules like a top player, at least to start this year. He's only played the Australian Open and Rio, pulled out of Acapulco after his tough run in Rio to the title. So I mean, they're already, you know, they're not chasing points, they're not chasing, you know, prize money. It's clear to see that they're really building for the future. That, and the same, we know he's going to get there eventually. So that with Juan Carlos Ferrero, his coach, obviously a former world #1 and a Grand Slam winner, he seems to have a great coach there in his corner who's managed him. And yeah, I do think he does have the potential, particularly out of the, as we mentioned, the kind of 19 or under or 20 and under guys. If you're going to consider Sinner and Musetti sort of as similar, in the same age group as Alcaraz, for me, he looks the most impressive out of that group, and that's saying something given how great the other two look, particularly Sinner. So I don't think it's unfair to kind of tout him as a potential Grand Slam winner. I just do think he looks that good, and already at 18 with, you know, potentially 15 years plus ahead of him, barring injuries and other unexpected factors, he's going to get so much opportunity to win.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on the scheduling, by the way. I think it was a smart decision to pull out of Acapulco, considering the run that he'd put in Rio. And I think another young lad who's sort of shown similar maturity to him, Yannick Sinner, I think he was the same towards the end of last season. He had a chance of qualifying for the ATP finals, I believe, and he was asked, you know, are you going to chase down those points? And he's like, no, I'm not going to, you know, play 250s every week to try and make the ATP finals. Plenty of years ahead of me to do it in the future. And I do think it is smart managing your schedule like that, just making sure that you're fresh and fit for when you need to be. And like you say, not chasing points, not chasing prize money. It'll come naturally if you put in the right work, do the right things, and him and his team certainly seem to be approaching it the right way. So, you know, Carlos Alcaraz, a player with massive potential, moving on now to Rafa Nadal, his countryman. I mean, this start to the year on hard courts as well. Did you see this coming from Nadal?
No, I didn't really see this coming. I mean, and I hadn't written Rafa Nadal off. I wasn't kind of someone in the camp of seeing him as not being a contender for the Australian Open, or, you know, seeing his days of winning big hardcourt titles behind him. But I thought, you know, at this stage early in his comeback at the age of 35, I did think it would be tough for him to have, you know, this level of success, taking on, you know, the best of the next gen on hard courts, especially Medvedev, who, as you mentioned, he's being twice already this year, extremely impressively. I mean, it's a 15-0 start to the year for Nadal, 3 titles, his 4th Acapulco title, and I think his 91st ATP title. So I mean, he's closing in on that 100, which is, I mean, just incredible, really. It's just, you lose words almost for, I mean, what he's achieving, really, especially after the foot injury last year. I mean, even kind of into the August, September sort of period last year, we saw him place Washington, the City Open, where he didn't look right. He then ended up pulling out of more events and ending his season. With all that going on, for him to be back here now in February of the following year, with having won all 3 events he's played on hard courts, which has been historically the surface which has caused him physical problems, really, it's incredible. And I would even make a case, I wouldn't argue with anyone who says Medvedev is the best player in the world right now, as you mentioned earlier, but I would make a case that you could say Nadal is right up there with him, at least, just based on what we've seen at the start of the year in terms of form. Obviously, Djokovic is still in there, but given we haven't seen him as much, we just kind of based on who we've seen the most. And I would say Nadal is right up there with Medvedev. Who knows whether he'll be in the race for world #1. He said he's not going to chase it. Obviously, at this stage of his career, he needs to manage his schedule, but he's playing that well right now.
I mean, the slams are worth the biggest points, and there's no doubt that he'll play. I think Wimbledon is the one where you think he might decide to give it a miss, but I see him playing all 4 slams this year. French Open, you've got to make him the clear favourite, so he could hit the world #1, even if he manages his schedule quite closely and you know, doesn't opt to play in even, you know, the 18 tournaments that make up your ranking. But as you've mentioned, sort of, it is, well, you didn't really mention, but you mentioned Djokovic being out, and I do feel like it's often been thrown. I mean, I see it all the time since the final, from Djokovic fans, that Nadal wouldn't have won in Australia had Djokovic been there. And I think I said very much the same thing after that podcast. Djokovic has a 2-0 record against Nadal at Australia, you know, but people don't mention that it's only 2 matches. People just say Nadal has never beaten Djokovic in Australia. Do you think that, looking back now, especially with the way that Nadal's carried on this form, he would have had a genuine chance against Djokovic if he'd have played him in Australia this year?
Yeah, I would have given him a genuine chance. Yeah, I mean, I would still have probably predicted Djokovic to win that match had it happened, which I think it would have been in the semi-finals. But I would give Nadal a chance, and I think a better chance than he probably would have had, particularly in recent years on hard courts in a slam, just from the level we saw from him there, and what he ultimately went on to do in the final against Medvedev. We saw, you know, what it was going to take to stop him, and I think probably Djokovic He's the only player who might have done it. I mean, obviously Medvedev came very close to doing it, but yeah, I would have given Nadal a chance. I know he hasn't beaten Djokovic on a hard court, I think, since 2013, but I think the level we've seen from him on hard courts here would have given him as good a chance to do it as he has for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, coming on to the whole Djokovic situation, you know, it looks like he's flat out refusing to get vaccinated, sticking by his personal principles. And looking at, I think people have mentioned that the French Open, the US Open are likely to have quite tight rules around vaccination. So there's a lot of doubt in the air around Djokovic at the moment, just how much tennis we'll see him play this year. It's so disappointing for me, and I don't know if you're the same, that he's not going to be there. And even though he isn't my favorite player, I do want him to be at those tournaments, but it almost seems weird to me that he had a chance to make himself clearly the best tennis player in the world, run away with the slam record, and he might actually take that chance away from himself.
Absolutely, I agree. And I mean, even just purely from a tennis perspective, I agree with what you said. I'm disappointed. I would love to see him playing. I mean, I want to see Djokovic and Nadal both playing, and Federer as well, when he's able to play. Hopefully, if he's able to come back from the injury, you want to see the three greatest players of all time. Definitely, in my opinion, I think many agree. We want to see them continue playing for as long as we can. And Djokovic, with what we saw him do last year, was unbelievable, winning 3 out of the 4 slams, nearly winning the Grand Slam. To then not see him this year, to see how he would match up against the resurgent Nadal and Medvedev improving all the time, Tsitsipas and Zverev in the mix, plus some other young guys. It's going to be a big miss. We missed him in Australia. He would definitely be a big miss at the French Open if he couldn't defend his title due to his decision. Also the US Open, as you mentioned, is there's a question mark over that. Rules could change, but as it stands, it's not looking great for those 2 slams. I think he would be able to play Wimbledon, I've seen mentioned, but even looking at the clay court season, I think there's been some doubt over Monte Carlo and Rome. I'm unsure about Madrid, but yeah, there's the possibility that he could miss, the majority of the big events on clay. And even the French Open. So it is a real shame, I think, for tennis. I want to see Djokovic playing. So, purely from a tennis perspective, I wish he would do what it takes to play. But look, I'm not asking him to change his decision. I want to see him play. But he knows the rules could change to allow that to happen in the coming months. But I mean, as it stands, he mentioned in Dubai, it doesn't look like he's going to be able to play Indian Wells and Miami, which are the big events straight on the horizon, and he's going to be missed.
Moving on to one of Djokovic's peers now, Juan Del Potro is a man that was capable of pushing the big 3, the big 4 very closely. He was the first out of the group around the big 3 to manage to get his hands on a slam. Before Wawrinka managed it, he took the US Open title, coming through a really strong draw to win it as well. I mean, I want to make this a bit of a tribute to Delpo. He's a fantastic player to watch and an unreal forehand. It's looking likely that he's retired from tennis. He hasn't fully committed to it, but most of what he said seems to be leaning that way. Just sum up your thoughts on the man. How much do you love that man? How big of a miss is he to tennis?
Absolutely, I do love Del Potro. I mean, as you mentioned, a fantastic player, by all accounts, a fantastic guy. I don't think anyone seems to dislike Del Potro. Pretty much everyone you hear talk about him, and the tributes we've heard since his appearance in Buenos Aires, which maybe his last. People have only got positive things to say about him as a player and a person. And yeah, happy to say he was definitely one of my favorite players to watch. I've always loved watching Del Potro. Unfortunately, we just haven't been able to see enough of him really from the time I've been watching tennis now. Well, you could say throughout really his career, he's been robbed, unfortunately, of significant periods, particularly during his prime. And yet when you still look at what he achieved, despite the fact that, you could say he's almost lost kind of 6 full seasons, 5 to 6. I mean, it's incredible to still win a Grand Slam, a Masters 1000 title, 22 titles in total. I mean, it's a Hall of Fame career, and he's had pretty much half his career almost. It just shows what an incredible player he is. I really do think he would have won more Grand Slam titles, had he not been so badly affected by severe injuries. I'm not, it's hard to predict exactly how many he could have won given the era he was playing in, but I do think he, we saw him reach another final in 2018 after he came back from the several wrist surgeries. I mean, and one of the fantastic memories for me was leading Argentina to the Davis Cup title in 2016. I mean, just an incredible effort. I was really pleased to see him do that at the time. Argentina had never won the Davis Cup, and I mean, he came back from 2-0 down in the final for the first time in his career, beat Marin Cilic in the fourth rubber that was, which Argentina were 2-1 down at the time. So with the match on the line, he delivered there for the first time in his career from 2 sets down, and Argentina went on to win it. That was a fantastic achievement. Obviously, a silver medal and a bronze at the Olympics, where he played an epic match with Murray in Rio in 2016, which I'm sure many people remember after he beat Nadal and Djokovic earlier in the tournament. I mean, just incredible when representing his country, incredible at the slams as well, particularly the US Open, where he won in 2009, beating a near his prime Federer in the final after Nadal in the semis. I mean, you could go on with Del Potro, but they're just some of the most impressive achievements, like I mentioned, from a list which is right up there as a Hall of Fame career, and one of the best players in probably the best era of all time.
I absolutely agree with pretty much everything you've said right there. An electric player to watch, the power and the angles he could get, especially off his forehand side. And he always played sort of with a passion, with a real love for the game. And especially, as you've mentioned, that national pride, we know it's often entrenched in Argentinian sports, and he really did seem to get a kick out of representing Argentina, leading them to the Davis Cup. But he also seemed to play his best tennis at Olympics as well. Bronze in 2012, I believe, and silver in 2016. And he pushed Murray all the way. And, as much as I was backing Murray in that match, he just got out of it with pure respect for the opponent as well. Considering all he's achieved, and like you say, in such an injury-hit career, how much tennis he's had to miss, do you feel maybe he is, in a way, the GOAT that got away with it? He could have been right up there with the big three if it wasn't for those injury issues.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm not saying he would have won as many slams or maybe not double figures, but I think he could have been, for sure, he could have won, as I said, multiple more. I mean, 3, maybe 5. I think he would have been in that bracket with Andy Murray, possibly Stan Wawrinka, although I would have Andy Murray ahead of Wawrinka anyway. I know they've won the same number of slams, but in terms of total achievements, I think he would have been closer to a Murray who's won I think around well over 50 titles, or is it 49? But he's going to get way more. Del Potro, as I mentioned, with 22, I think you would have seen him possibly with double that. I mean, more slams, more Masters 1000s, a regular player at the ATP finals without a doubt. And I think he got a career high of number 3. I mean, he could have possibly had a chance to get world number 1. He may not have kept it for a long period given who he's competing against, but there could have been a window there if he'd been healthy and able to play regularly. He was definitely a player who's good enough, I think, to be a world number 1 at his best. So just as you mentioned, in terms of his game, unbelievable. And his forehand, you'd put up there, I would definitely put up there as one of the greatest forehands of all time. I mean, it really is unique just with how flat it was, but how the power he can generate, but how reliable it still was, and how he could hit winners from pretty much anywhere. It's really is one of the all-time great shots. And Del Potro, he'll definitely be missed if we don't see him again, but so many great memories to look back on from his career.
I think that wraps it up nicely on Del Potro. The thing that I really want to discuss on the ATP side is Alexander Zverev in Acapulco, defending the title as well. But he didn't get the chance to defend his singles title because in his doubles match, he made quite a clear attack on the umpire. He walked up to his chair, intimidated him, whacked his racket against the chair a few times. Now we see players get annoyed at umpires all the time, argue with calls, argue with things like hindrance and stuff like that, calls and things like that. But just how much did Zverev kind of cross the line with this behavior?
Yeah, he absolutely crossed the line. And as you mentioned, we've seen players complain to officials or argue with officials, but we haven't really seen something like that where he came close to hitting the umpire with his racket and obviously verbally abused them as well. I mean, we have seen things like that, the verbal side before probably, but that combined with, you know, the hammering the racket on the chair and, you know, Nelly and the umpire, it's definitely crossed the line. It's not acceptable. I mean, we've seen things in the past with, more so probably in past generations, with players like John McEnroe, who, you know, notorious for their issues with umpires. But even McEnroe, I don't think, you know, physically came close to something like that. Well, Jimmy Connors. So yeah, I mean, I think action should be taken. I mean, I think he was rightly defollowed from the tournament, you know, and he's been stripped of the points and prize money he'd already earned. So yeah, that was the right thing to do, but there hasn't been any further action taken. That could still happen, but I mean, for me, I think he probably should be suspended from the tour. I'm not sure for what period would kind of be fair for that, but I would have thought for at least kind of Indian Wells and Miami, you know, for a month, you'd think, possibly longer. I've seen some people suggesting that it should be much longer, but I think there should be some kind of suspension. So we just haven't really seen that before.
Yeah, you know, I don't think anything, and I don't think anyone's suggested anything as serious as a permanent ban or even a year ban. But I think the key thing is with behaviour like this is you have to make a clear stance on it. You know, as much as sometimes maybe you don't like the umpires, you may feel the calls go against you. They're there to do a job. I'm sure they always try and do it to the best of their ability, and they shouldn't be subjected to that level of abuse, to that level of intimidation. And, you know, players, especially high-ranked players who have a lot of pull and a lot of draw, can't go on thinking that because of that pull and that draw they have means they can behave how they want. So I think definitely some kind of tour suspension is needed, maybe just for a couple of months to drive home that point. I think he is scheduled to represent Germany in the Davis Cup, and it looks like that will go ahead. And it might be a case that any ban could only apply to ATP tournaments, so that'd discount the slams, I think, as well, maybe, because the slams are administered by the ITF, I believe. So it's weird. It's a strange one, and I'm sure the story will continue to develop. I don't think we've heard the end of that situation yet. I think I do want to touch on the defense that some people have made of Zverev, the sleep deprivation defense, and the fact that he was scheduled to play very late. The match was pushed back even further by previous matches going the distance on the night before in the singles. Do you think sleep deprivation, it can have an impact on your behaviour, can't it? But just how much can you factor that in when deciding on punishment?
Yeah, I mean, it is a point. I mean, it's relevant, but I don't think it, you know, legislates for, it still doesn't legislate for the behavior. It's maybe something to take into account when considering maybe the length of the ban and what, you know, the mood he might have been in, how he was feeling after, I mean, playing his match against Brooksby in the first round, which I think was the latest ever finish to an ATP match, which, I mean, unbelievable match, by the way. Watched that. That's probably the first match I've been able to watch live in Acapulco, because it was still going on well into the morning here in the UK. That's how late it finished. With Acapulco, usually is, if you're in the UK, you've got to stay up during the night to watch it. So I mean, it shows how late that match was. It was a grueling match. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a question of whether that match, you know, should have been played. Could it have been scheduled for the following day? But Acapulco is a tournament that starts late. It's not the only one that's like that, and it was an extreme example where I think the 3 longest matches in the tournament's history were all played on that day, that being the following the other 2. So I mean, unusual circumstances, yeah, maybe something to take into account, but it doesn't really excuse the behavior still.
Yeah, and I just finish that up by saying, you know, we've spoken in the past about the allegations hanging over Zverev, and serious allegations that do need properly looking into. I don't know just how much the ATP are investigating, that the SARE are investigating, but we kind of hear nothing about the investigation. You know, sometimes I just feel like it's say we're taking action, but just hope people forget about it kind of thing. A lot of people are making the point that if he can act that way in front of a crowd of people and a TV audience, how can he act behind closed doors? And I really don't think he's done himself any favours. I think it's shocking behaviour. It doesn't prove anything. So it is maybe a bit unfair to say say that. I think if I had the allegations on me that are hanging over Zverev's head right now, I wouldn't be acting like that under any circumstance. So I think that's as much as I want to discuss on the ATP side. I don't know if you just want to touch on any more points or any players that have impressed you over the last month.
Yeah, well, no, I'll just echo what you said there on Zverev. That yeah, people have made that point. I agree. While it doesn't prove anything, it's definitely not doing kind of his image, his reputation any good. And I mean, you talk about possibly not being the most popular player with fans, partly due to the allegations you mentioned as we've come before, but partly due to, I don't know, he's been called arrogant a lot by some. People have questioned kind of his attitude and things like this. That doesn't help. This is kind of different to a violent outburst of smashing your racket, and loads of players get frustrated like that. And I don't have a problem with players showing emotion on court, but yeah, he definitely hasn't done himself any favors with this. And just in terms of other players, I'll just touch on Jenson Brooksby, who played that match. Probably would come to mind someone who's really impressed me. He made the final in Dallas as well. Before that, losing to Opelka, but he's someone who, yeah, the more I've watched him, the more he's impressed me as a player. And in that match against Zverev, had match points. It was an unbelievable effort from him. Went down 3 sets in the end, but he's already a guy we've seen some really strong performances from in a fairly short space of time. He just has fantastic shot tolerance and movement, return of serve, and for a fairly tall guy, you still feel he can improve his serve a lot. So he's definitely someone to watch out for. Brooksby, I would say, possibly the most impressive out of all the young Americans they've got.
I just want to add on Brooksby. My favourite bit of tennis trivia, I think, is the fact that he's named after Jenson Button. I mean, as a Formula One fan and a Formula One fan that absolutely loved Button when I was younger, I just love that bit of trivia. The fact he's an American, and his dad's an American who loves motor racing, and I don't know if he likes the name Jenson or he liked Jenson Button, but looking at when Jenson Brooksby was born, Button was only just breaking through as a young driver. He hadn't scored any race wins or even any podiums yet, I don't think. So it's so interesting that it's named after Jenson Button. I think that's absolutely brilliant. But I think that's a nice place to wrap up a summary on the ATP side. Just before we move on to the WTA, I do want to look ahead briefly to the upcoming Masters. We've got the Sunshine Double to look forward to, Indian Wells and Miami. How much are you looking forward to these two?
Yeah, I'm absolutely looking forward to these two, and it'll be the first time since 2019 where we're actually going to get the Sunshine Double back to back, in its classic sense. Because starting from 2020, they were, I think, both cancelled, and then 2021, I believe, neither were held. And then last year they were held separately. So it's great to see them back in their usual position, like in March as the back to back Masters 1000 events, and I think many would argue like the two of the best Masters 1000 events, definitely right up there in terms of prestige, and yeah, just it always produces some great matches at a high level of tennis. So I'm looking forward to those events. Definitely, it's going to be really interesting to see. I think Nadal we're going to see in Indian Wells, at least unless he changes his mind. He said he's going to make a final decision, but I think we'll see him play there, which again, it'll be great to see Nadal continue his start to the year, to see whether Medvedev, if those two face each other again, it'll be really interesting to see a third meeting on hard courts already. So a lot to look forward to at that tournament. And also mentioned for Cam Norrie, who's had a really good few weeks after a tough start in Australia. He's defending the title, so that's going to be great to see after he's won the title in Delray Beach, then made the final in Acapulco, beating Tsitsipas. So yeah, a lot to watch out for there.
Shocked. I am shocked. I haven't mentioned Cam Norrie, and I feel so disappointed in myself. He had a difficult start to the year, following up on an excellent year where he pushed on last year. But he's finally building on that, and I think the way he's building, we could see him in the top 10 soon. Is he defending his Indian Wells points?
The points from last year won't come off until I believe October, when the event was held last year. So he's defending the title, but he's still going to keep the points until later in the year.
That's good, because it'd be unfair to take those points off him so soon. After he broke from, managed to win a Masters title, it was a great performance back then. I was buzzing for him. Another Brit that's doing well, Jack Draper. He's come off the back of 2 Challenger titles in a row now. So hopefully moving up the rankings. last year, weird one for him. He was given a wild card to Miami, I think. He was playing really well, and then he had fitness issues. He ended up collapsing on court. It was actually quite worrying for him for a moment, but he came back. He went to Wimbledon, given a wild card there. Obviously, as a young talented Brit, it was always on the cards. And, played all right against Djokovic, took the first set, then kind of the run of play went as we expected it to, but he certainly no shame in the way he lost the following 3 sets. So yeah, it'd be good to see him continue to push on. But with that, we will move on to the WTA now. A lot fewer tournaments to discuss here, basically. I think the only ones I've got down are Anett Kontaveit took the 500 title in St. Petersburg, followed by Helena Ostapenko winning in Dubai. That's also a 500 tournament, a WTA 500. And then in a WTA 1000, the first one of the season, I believe, Iga Swiatek takes a title in Doha. A dominant final win against Anett Kontaveit, who, was coming back off a recent title herself. So I just suppose talking points there. Kontaveit with a title and a final to her name. Good start to the year so far, hasn't it?
Yeah, really impressive from Kontaveit. I mean, I think I would say pretty much continuing the results we saw from her at the back end of last year on hard courts, especially. It's the only kind of disappointment I think would have been an Australian Open loss. I think in the second round to Clara Towson, obviously a great player, but that she hasn't quite been able to translate that unbelievable hardcore form into a Grand Slam yet. But you'd think it would be a matter of time. Obviously, she's going to have to wait until the US Open, but yeah, I mean, a record at the hardcore events really has just been outstanding from last season onwards, as I mentioned, towards the end of last season. So another title and final for her. I mean, continues to impress. I mean, not far away from the top 5 now either. So yeah, really impressive from her, going from kind of a player I saw as just maybe a solid top 20 player. We hadn't seen too many big runs from her at big events, but she's really been transformed from that period onwards, and working with Dmitry Tursunov, who'd also coached Arina Sabalenka previously, and obviously he was a former ATP player, seems to have made a good impact. But yeah, it'll be great to see how she continues moving forward, as we mentioned at the Grand Slam events, and also moving on to the clay. Well, first of all, Indian Wells and Miami. I mean, they're 2 big tournaments you'd feel for on hard courts, big opportunities, but where she'll translate a form on other surfaces. But yeah, I'm really impressed by Kontaveit.
Yeah, Iga Swiatek as well wins the biggest title that we've seen this last month. So in the WTA, a hard court title for her. It's not really a surprise. She's always had a good game on hard courts, got good results on hard courts. Clay, everyone feels is the best surface right now. It's where she's got a slam title first and foremost. But yeah, encouraging signs for Swiatek definitely to take the title in Doha. What are your thoughts on her progress so far this year?
Yeah, a big title for her, and as you mentioned, really impressive result on a hard court, biggest title on hard courts, and also to go with the semi-final at the Australian Open, which was a great run for her, obviously. So clear signs that she's already made great strides on this service. As you mentioned already, we know what she can do on clay, being a French Open and Rome champion, and you'd still say that's the best service, but clearly on hard courts she's making those strides. And it's a big title. I mean, Doha, as you mentioned, the biggest event we've had on the WTA side outside of the slams yet. So just really promising signs for Swiatek, and I think outlining herself as a contender as well at the hardcore slams, as she showed signs of at the Australian Open as well as the French Open. So yeah, really promising for Swiatek.
Yeah, 100% agreed. I do really like Swiatek's game. I think she's one of, I find her entertaining to watch, and I think it is we know that she's quite Rafa inspired. In fact, I think she was at the Australian Open final. She admits to being a big fan of him, and so sometimes her strokes do look very Rafa-like. She has kind of the looping lasso forehand. So I'm glad to see her picking up more titles. I hope she goes on to really push on further this year. She's at a great place for her age anyway, and hopefully she's just only gonna climb higher and higher. I think we should touch on Helena Ostapenko as well, as other WTA champion from the last month, and honestly running out of talking points on the WTA side already because there hasn't been that much action. So firstly, Helena Ostapenko, what are your thoughts on her? And secondly, please take over as host and just touch on anything else you want to touch on because I'm running out.
Sure. Yeah, Ostapenko for me has possibly been the biggest talking point on the WTA side since the Australian Open. I mean, just a real resurgence from her. I mean, obviously we've still seen impressive results from her in periods, but she has been fairly inconsistent. I think it's fair to say. I think she made the semi-finals in Indian Wells and the final in Luxembourg last year, also possibly the final in Eastbourne. So she's had some really good weeks still, but she's had some early losses as well. It hasn't necessarily strung it together. So I mean, as a run of 3 back-to-back tournaments, semi-finals in St. Petersburg, winning Dubai, and then semi-finals in Doha. Yeah, that's a really strong run, and I think kind of just reminding everyone how good she is. I mean, obviously had been labeled a bit as a one-hit wonder, for not really coming close to win another slam since her French Open title, which maybe was a bit unfair, but I think it's fair to say for a talent. I mean, the unbelievable power she has on both sides. I think, yeah, it is an all-out game, so maybe that's why we've seen some slightly up and down results, but some consistency here. I mean, working with Marion Bartoli as well, obviously a former Wimbledon champion, with her in a corner, that seems to be becoming a fruitful coaching partnership, and I think it's going to be really interesting to watch Ostapenko moving forward. Firstly in Indian Wells and Miami, if she can continue the form, but then moving on to the clay, obviously as I mentioned, the French Open, obviously winning that, it's going to be great to see how she does on the clay and whether she's really going to be a contender at the slams this year, because the level she's produced these last 3 tournaments, I think she is a contender. And also, as you mentioned, for other tournament points on the WTA side, I'll just mention Maria Sakkari, who made the final in St. Petersburg and semi-final in Doha. Some strong results for Sakkari. I mean, I think it's definitely positive in the sense, some good runs there, continuing her impressive level of tennis. I think she's up to 6 in the world now. She continues to make strides, but just the slight concern would be not quite converting it into winning titles. She's still only won 1 WTA title, which, I mean, they're not easy to win, but I think for a player of her quality, we've talked about her a lot on this podcast, how much we both rate a game, I think, and certainly for me, she's got all the tools to be winning a lot more titles. I think 1 and 3 in WTA finals now, and she's also lost quite a few semi-finals. So I think that with Sakkari, maybe there's a bit of a mental hurdle there to get over, but I'm sure she'll do it with she consistently going deep in tournaments and producing the level we've seen. I think she'll get over that hurdle and add to her tally, which then she could possibly translate into the slams as well, where we've seen her go deep without quite going all the way to a final. So for me, yeah, she'll do. I mean, and the players she's losing to there is Swiatek and Kontaveit. There's certainly not bad losses. So, but just want to watch out for going forward whether she can win those big matches.
Yep, and I suppose it's a good point to actually look ahead. Also, the Sunshine Double happening in the WTA. So, as you said, Maria Sakkari, decent month or so. Previewing the Sunshine Double, is she a contender there?
Yeah, she's definitely a contender. I think we saw her reach the semis in Miami last year, where she had a really impressive win against Naomi Osaka. I think there was a bagel set in there. So definitely an opportunity for her, I think. And I think she'll enjoy the conditions with them being fairly slower hard courts, particularly Indian Wells. I mean, it's been compared to like a hard court that plays quite similar to clay, with it being fairly, well, one of the slower hard courts and the highest bounce in pretty unique conditions there. I think she'll enjoy that, given what we've seen from her on clay, which I don't know whether you'd say clay or hard courts are her best service. She's impressive on both, but we've seen some really good stuff from her on clay, particularly at the French Open. So I think she'll enjoy the conditions of both those tournaments. As I mentioned, the strong Miami showing, so a good opportunity for her there, but she definitely has the power to hit through a slow court, does play with more spin on the forehand. So I think she's well suited, definitely.
Yeah, and just previewing further, what are some other players that are also coming into your consideration for the Sunshine Double? In fact, you know what? We're moving away from a preview and predictions format, but you can predict winners, can't you? Give me two winners if you had to say who's taking each of those titles.
Okay. Well, I'll go for Sakkari in Indian Wells, since I've talked to her about how impressed I am, and I do feel she's due to get over the line, win a big title, and get that second title on the board. Obviously, it's tough to predict on the WTA side, but I feel she's in as good a place as anyone. And for Miami, I'll go with Kontaveit, just with the form we've seen from her, as I touched on before. I think what she's carrying in on hard courts, the amount of winning she's done of late, I'd probably go for those two. But it'll be interesting. Muguruza might be looking to bounce back. She hasn't had the greatest start to the year. I think the conditions which she could enjoy too. And Paula Badosa, I would give a mention to as well. Obviously, she won Indian Wells last year. Again, another player who's great on clay as well as hard courts. And I think those type of players are the ones who do enjoy Indian Wells, and Miami particularly, because their games translate well to it. But yeah, if I had to pick, I'll go for Sakkari and Kontaveit.
Good predictions. I've had to put my neck on the line as well, since I've forced you. You know what? If Swiatek plays Indian Wells, I might give her Indian Wells, and I'll give Miami to Gabby Muguruza, just a player I like, and I have taken a couple of difficult results recently, so it would be good to see her bounce back, because she's absolutely full of ability. Now, I think that pretty much brings us to the end. I haven't got anything to add, really. Is there anything you want to touch on, Ewan, before we wrap up?
I guess I could give a quick prediction for the ATP Sunshine Double events. I'll go for Nadal to win Indian Wells. If he plays, that'll be interesting. I think that'll take his winning streak into the 20s. So, he would still be about halfway to the record, but just thought I'd give that a mention. I think the record winning streak on the men's side's 46. Guillermo Vilas, you never know. If Nadal wins Indian Wells, then he probably won't play Miami going into the clay season. You probably have to do a clean sweep, including Roland Garros, but that'll be quite. I'm not predicting that, but that'll be quite something to watch out for. But as we mentioned, with players who do well in Indian Wells, Nadal enjoys it. He's won it 3 times, so I'll go for Nadal in Indian Wells, and I'll go for Medvedev in Miami, because surely he's due a big title on hard courts.
Yeah, I feel a bit ashamed, actually, because on my notes here I've got written down Rafa unbeaten streak as one of my talking points. Then when I think I brought up Rafa as a talking point, I didn't mention the words unbeaten streak. He hasn't lost yet in 2022, so I'm glad you've brought that up, because it'd be terrible if we got throughout the pod without mentioning it. But I do think if he plays, I see him finally taking a defeat. I don't know who to, but I think, you know what, I'm going to predict a Medvedev double. I think he'll be keen to get his hands on a title. I don't think he has one this year yet, has he? No, without a title this year so far. So he's definitely due one, especially on hard court. So especially now, buoyed by the world #1 ranking, I think he'll want to go out and impress and prove that he's world #1. So a Daniil Medvedev double, and I think that pretty much brings us to the end of the first podcast in this new format, and I enjoyed it, and I hope you all enjoyed it too. As we're moving into a monthly, it means that we can actually say when we'll be back, and it is around the same time next month. We've got a nice little gap in between the Sunshine Double and before the next tournaments. So yeah, we'll see you then to talk about the action that's taking place on both coasts of the USA, on the ATP and WTA side. So we hope you all enjoyed it, and we'll see you again soon.